say this is a pretty close fit, wouldn't you? But who did Hutner crash land his plane into the side of a mountain 30 miles from where the Chosin Reservoir, was going on? And the only one to be here to know that would be, well, Bob would know it, but Doug back there. Who did he crash his plane for? This was in 1950. He crashed his plane for that man, Jesse Brown. Now, Jesse Brown is obviously black, and he's obviously not good looking. Now, he's got a steely, killer-eyed look to him, but he's not good looking, all right? But he's the son of a Mississippi sharecropper. So that makes him particularly close to me. And he, as a little boy, he would look up in the field while he was helping his dad chop cotton. And he'd see the planes and he'd think, I want to do that. Well, even in the late 40s, even after the Red Tails and the Tuskegee Airmen, it was difficult. He was the first black naval aviator. But he was so respected and he was so accepted by his, by his brothers, by his band of brothers, that Thomas Hutner crash-landed his airplane to try to save him. Now, they didn't save him. They couldn't get him out. The helicopter got there, and they couldn't fly at night. This was in 1950, so they had to leave him there. He died that night. They kept flying missions over him for the next 2 or 3 days. And Jesse died a warrior's, he died in a warrior's tomb. They eventually dropped napalm on the area, and it that was into Jesse. His last words to Hutner was, "Tell Daisy, his wife, that I love her." Now, they're fixing to make this into a movie. This is the kind of thing America needs to see right now. These two people couldn't even go and had lunch in Mississippi together. But that man from the Northeast, that man that had everything in the world going from that man that was totally different from this man, risked his life to save him. And Thomas Hutner lived a long and fruitful life, died at about 90. You can check all that out. I'm looking forward to the movie. Fear in the Bible has 2 meanings. And the first meaning is fear of the Lord. Same word, different meanings. I mean, sometimes, I think it was Led Zeppelin, sometimes words have 2 meanings. I know that's kind of dating me, but Carol gets it. I mean, you remember that, right? Rock and roll. Well, sometimes words do have 2 meanings, and really, a linguist doesn't even see those as the same words in a sense. I mean, is bank on a river bank, and bank is where you put your money. I mean, it's 2 different words. They just happen to look alike and sound alike. So fear of the Lord, and then fear of everything else. So I'm going to ask a deep theological question. This is such a deep theological question that I have to prepare my congregation for it. I can't just launch into it. It might be too much. So here's my first preparation. We're going to play Jeopardy for a second. Who was Charles Dunan Chamberlin? Now, nobody knows. I didn't know. I wouldn't expect you to know. Who was John Landy? Then this next one you might know. But there's all a common theme to this. Who was Buzz Aldrin? All right, let's go back. This is how we value things. Charles Dunan. Well, let me just ask you this. Who was Charles Lindbergh? First guy to cross the Atlantic, right? I mean, we all remember Jimmy Stewart in the movie, Spirit of St. Louis. If you hadn't seen it, it's a great movie. Charles Dunan Chamberlain was the second guy. He don't get no love. And who was Roger Bannister? Now, this one might be a little harder. I mean, that Most of us don't. Oh, okay, we got one taker back here for $200. But Roger Bannister was the first guy to break a 4-minute mile. And what's so interesting about it, they had fossies back then. They were saying, it's impossible for a man to run a 4-minute mile. His heart will explode. But after he did it, John Landy was the second guy to run a... And Buzz Aldrin was a famous astronaut, but who was Neil Armstrong? He was the first man to walk on the moon. And Buzz Aldrin came 19 minutes later. So the question is what was the second sin? Don't answer this, Bob. You're not permitted. But what was the second sin? We all know the first sin. Reaching up and grabbing that apple and eating it in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, what was the second sin? And he said, this was Adam, I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked and so I hid. So you could either say the second sin was fear. You could say the second sin was avoidance of God. But whatever it was, I want to think of it as fear. And fear is a deep question, but I've got to briefly go through, and I'm going to be brief about this, as the doctrine of good and evil. This is abbreviated from RB thing because fear and evil are so closely tied in together. And remember, it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't the tree of the knowledge of drinking and wenching. Now, y'all all do know what wenching is, right? It's an old English word for, let me just put it this way. Doug would know this, a honky-tonk angel, okay? A woman of the night, and it's the wench is the noun, and it's become a verb. So it wasn't the tree of, drinking and wenching. It was a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I'll just run through this briefly. But the definition, and it's particularly important in our day. Just look at how much evil we have in our society right now. This is a really important doctrine. Evil encompasses the policy, purpose, and modus operandi of Satan, John 8:44. I did not go into a lot of these verses. I read them all. If you want, you can go back and read them yourself. Sometimes in reading verses that people put down, some of them make sense, some of them don't. As the ruler of this world by which he seeks to capture and control the human soul, establish his own millennium, and become the victor of the angelic conflict. Evil is Satan's thinking. Sin and human good are part of his policy. So in the garden, you had the tree of lies and you had the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. One was God's plan. One was Satan's plan. And when they picked the knowledge of good and evil, they were picking Satan's plan. Just as grace and doctrine represent the genius in thinking of God, so evil represents the genius in thinking of Satan. Therefore, evil is a system of thought just as doctrine is a system of thought. And we see it every day. And even religious people can be very evil. Evil is also a function of the sin nature as a ruler of human life. Evil is a distortion of Bible doctrine and the laws of divine establishment. Making men into women and women into man. That's evil. The greatest good for the greatest number, that's evil. Communism, that's evil. Evil was not judged on the cross. Sin was judged on the cross. Evil was not judged on the cross. And it's only sin was judged on the cross. Christ could not be judged for evil, Satan's policy, because human good and evil remains issues throughout the course of the angelic conflict. How much are you going to trust God? And that relates to evil, it relates to fear. There's no evil in God. God judges evil in time. In spite of evil in the world, Jesus Christ controls history. Jesus Christ permits evil to run its course as part of the angelic conflict. So, The theodicy of God, or the question of how can a just God allow so much evil and bad in the world? Evil answers that because the Lord is permitting evil to run its course so that He can demonstrate the fallacy of evil as opposed to the genius of grace. Evil is related to Satan. Both sin and evil originated from Satan. Satan's angels are called evil spirits or demons. Satan's domain is called an evil world. Satan's policy is called evil. Those under the influence of satanic policy are called evil men and inventors of evil. Evil related to man. Personal sin, human good, and evil emanate from the old sin nature. Sin is solved by rebound. That's easy. I mean, it really is. Human good and evil are solved by spiritual maturity and gap. That's much more difficult, and we fool ourselves on it all the time. We think we're so good because we hadn't sinned. And I don't mean just we. I mean me, you, and everybody else. Anybody that's a Christian. I'm so good because I don't do the 5 nasty things that other person does. Well, you may be full of evil. And you probably are if you have that attitude. Human good and evil are solved by spiritual maturity and gap. Evil and degeneracy start with a thought. Gap. Oh, that's right. Some of y'all hadn't had 50 years of listening to the Colonel. Gap is grace. I try to not put anything like that in there, but gap is grace apparatus for perception. It's just basically learning Bible doctrine under a pastor teacher such as Bob in a disciplined environment where you don't talk, Carol. I'm just teasing. Oh, you'd have been in real trouble under the Colonel. I mean, you sit there and you did not move. My sister said when she went there, she had to take a Xanax before she went inside. Well, she didn't really, but and she may hear this, so please forgive me. All right, so gap, grace apparatus for perception. Evil related to man, part 2. Evil in the soul is rationalized by establishing erroneous norms and standards that are called good instead of the divine norms and standards that are called good. Isaiah 5:20, calling good evil, calling evil good. I mean, we're familiar with that verse. And we're doing that all the time. I mean, we're seeing that right now play out horribly in our society, calling good bad, bad good, and it's just confusing everybody, and nobody's happy. You know, particularly the people that are caught up in this environment. Of all the people that should be happy, believers should be happy. But the only way believers will be happy is if they're getting Bible doctrine, they're believing Bible doctrine, and they're retaining Bible doctrine. Love for the details of life above love for Bible doctrine is always evil. And now I'm going to tell you that this is my 3rd sermon I've ever preached. You want to hear about the first one? Sure you do. I know Maria does. She's so curious. I was 11 years old. And my mother and I had just gotten back from Germany, and we were living in Zama, Mississippi, which is too small to even be on the map. I was going to a little, well, it wasn't a one-room school. I don't want to over-dramatize this, but I was in class with the 5th and 6th graders. That was how small it was. And the church would come every other Sunday. It was the Ebenezer Baptist Church, and so we were there at church that Sunday. I was 11 years old, and I guess I was convicted of the Spirit or whatever. And I walked down the aisle, and I asked the pastor if I could have a word with the congregation, and the fool let me. So I got up there to the congregation and proceeded to tell them that there were some people going fishing on Sunday, and they needed to be in church. Now, I still think that's good advice to anybody. And, you know, if you're not in church on Sunday, then where are you? You know, and if you're not here for both sessions, well, I've got a special thought about that, but I'm not going to say it because I view coming to church as worship. Yeah, you learn. I can learn as much sitting at home. maybe more, and watch a cat video or two in between. But it's the discipline, it's the fellowship with the other believers. So I let them have it. And I don't know if the fish were safe after that or not, but I let them have it. And then the second service was for my father. Love for the details of life above love for Bible doctrine is always evil. An evil person seeks to build happiness on someone else's unhappiness. Oh, I'm happy. I didn't realize this until just about a year ago. I've learned a lot from being here, Bob. I really learned a lot from you, and I've grown a lot in the last 2 years. I've gone through some health challenges, which I've never gone through before, and thank goodness I think I'm over them. But, I used to think, well, my life's so much better than so many other people. But that's erroneous thinking, because that is the corollary, well, it's a math word. I should be able to say corollary or something like that. I'll hear it from my sister. But if you're building your happiness, an evil person seeks to build his happiness on someone else's unhappiness. Well, you're building your happiness on somebody else's unhappiness if you think, well, I've got it better than they do. Because that's not the way to think. The real question to ask is, how good does the Lord want me to have it? Whether it's spiritual blessings, which covers everything, or material blessings, which we seem to dwell on. But if you don't have the spiritual blessings, the material blessings don't matter. Do you like the way it kind of fades in and out? I worked hard on this. You can't serve two masters. And the problem was I was into PowerPoint, and I had to completely switch over to, the devil here with, you can see it. But I learned it, and I enjoyed it. And, I made a nice parchment background with papyrus, fonts. I thought it was appropriate. Evil related to man, part 3. The influence of evil explains why the prayers of believers are not answered. Evil is self-destructive. We can see that, in some cases, but in other cases we might not. Evil in the soul shortens life. It may answer why the good die young. They're really not that good. I'm not saying that. We don't know, and we don't know. Vocabulary for Hebrew, and this was a thing I had problems with. I'd like to have brought in the actual Hebrew, alphabet, but there's several words. Avon, nothingness, vanity, evil. Ra, that's one of the main ones. An adjective for bad, evil, masculine noun for evil, misery. Ra'ah, feminine noun for evil. Ro'ah, badness of quality, evil as a quality. Ra'ah, to be bad, to be evil. So there's several words for evil. It's not a small subject. The vocabulary for Greek are kakos, adjective for evil, bad, worthless. Kakos, adverb for wickedly. Kakia, depravity, wickedness. Aneros, adjective for evil, worthless, degenerate. Honoria, those two words we get pornography from. Feminine, adjective for sinfulness, maliciousness. Phallus, evil, worthless, wicked. So it's well documented. And the scope of evil. Evil includes human good and every attempt to solve the problems of life apart from Bible doctrine and divine establishment. We're seeing that go on a daily basis. The government's going to solve all our problems regardless of who it bankrupts or regardless of they're going to solve them for us. We just got to believe. Anthropocentric altruism. Give, brother. You're not giving enough. Utopian socialism. If we could all just get everybody to follow Fosse's advice, we would get out of this thing. Religious activism. Let's go down on the corner and hold a sign that says repent. Legalism. Well, that I grew up in the Baptist church. I well know legalism. Revisionism, Marxism, pacifism, and probably several other isms. Scope of evil continued. Evil includes the restriction of human freedom for the so-called greater good. Do you see that going on right now? The distortion of law for the purpose of social and economic engineering. The insanity of allowing biological males to compete on a track team with biological females just escapes me and any other reasonable person. I mean, they can be confused if they want to be, but they don't need to be out there running against other, against real girls. The rise of bureaucracy, government abuse of power, and interference with free enterprise. Kind of sounds like America, right? Well, we're up to our necks in evil. More on the scope of evil. Evil includes Christian activities which substitute service for spiritual growth outside the academic discipline of the local church. The YMCA. Now, if I'd have really been good, I could have put a video in here with the YMCA busted loose. But I didn't know for 10 years they were gay, so I really liked that video. But anyway, I mean, there's anything outside the established local church where you come, you sit, you listen, you study, and a pastor teaches line by line and verse by verse from the original languages, which we're fortunate to have Bob do. It ain't happening. It's charging windmills. And evil is often mistaken for good. I mean, I watch PBS. I hate to admit it, but some of the programs are really good, and some of them just make me sick. And then they'll always say, well, something about for the greater good, or whatever their line is they want to. It's evil. More on the scope of evil. Sincere do-gooders practice evil. I mean, some of the most sincere, sweet. I mean, who was it? Mother Teresa? I mean, she was practicing evil. I mean, I know that's hard to say, and she did a lot of good, and there was a lot of people, but sincere do-gooders practice evil. Even legitimate good can be distorted or twisted into evil. The more involved a believer becomes in whitewashing the devil's world, the more evil is intensified. Therefore, the believer is warned to beware of associating with evil practitioners. Some last points on the scope of evil. Evil is a total inclusion of human ability, human talent, and works, and the total exclusion of grace. It's science over the Bible. And they were going to answer all our questions, but what's amazing is that science is coming back around to the Bible, and they don't know how to handle it. That's whole nother story, but it's happening right now. Evil never understands grace function, and that's the story about Matthew 20:15 about the the owner who goes out and he hires people at 6 o'clock, he hires people at 12 o'clock, he hires people at 6 o'clock, and he pays them all the same thing. And the union gets upset about it. Well, it's his money to spend. And he said, is your heart evil? Go read it. Go back and look at some of these. You can get it off. You get these verses off, and become aware of evil, and then it'll change the way you look at the Bible. Grace is the work of God, not human works. Evil encompassing human good distorts grace, and false doctrine is both evil and insanity. Evil is distinguished from sin. It's distinguished from war and disease. It's distinguished from demon possession. Believers can be evil possessed, but not demon possessed. Evil, the nation, and the fifth cycle. Evil leadership is anti-God. Conspiracy and revolution are evil. Saturation of evil leads to the destruction of the nation. More on the nation and evil. Judgment comes to a nation dominated by evil. The fifth cycle of discipline, you know what the fifth cycle is. I mean, it's in Leviticus 26, and it talks about the cycles of discipline that a nation goes through. The fifth cycle of discipline is also called an evil. God uses evil to punish an evil. Faithfulness to divine establishment principles protects the human race from evil. And the further you get away from the divine establishment principles, the more likely your nation is going to fail. So, are you, as a member of the royal family of God, a church-age believer influenced by evil or doctrine? And the scripture on that is quoted. Negative volition toward doctrine causes a believer to be changed by evil. Reversionism is always influenced by evil, and evil provides false security for reversionists. They feel good in what they're doing. They feel like they're going to really change things. We're really going to get something done about the gun issue. We're really going to get something done about, everything else. This is going to be a fair country. We're going to wipe out our history. We're going to rewrite it. Everybody's going to love each other. Yeah. Some final considerations of evil. The mature believer is protected from evil because they have maximum doctrine in their soul. That's the only thing that protects you from evil. And the scripture on that, and the believer is commanded to put away evil, and the scripture on that. Last thoughts on evil, but not the last thoughts for tonight. The mature believer avoids evil. Doctrine is a neutralizer of evil, and evil will be eliminated in the millennial reign of Christ. And let me just say this. Everybody ought to have to at least get one time to get up here in front of everybody and speak, and then you would appreciate our pastor so much more, because it's not easy. Prepping it, and I'm comfortable getting up in front of people. Some people are probably terrified to get up in front of people. But it's still a lot of work, and he does it every day. And he's up here 4 times and going to be 7 times next year. Now, there's a close relationship between evil and fear, and this is what I wanted to get to. For example, consider Psalm 23:4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Now, I'm going to take a slight detour. Not that way. That's all right. It worked at home. All right, so let's see. Command H. All right, hold on a second. Escape. Always a way to do this. Because you want to see this. This is good. Now, I don't use Logos. I like it, but I've been using Blue Letter Bible for about 10 years, and it helps me more understand the language, and I'm going to show you why. We're going to look at that one verse real quick. And that is, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I've gone there to Psalm 23. I click on it, and it brings up the Hebrew. And this is what's fascinating about blueletterbible.com. I'll go through and just kind of discuss every word real quick. Gam, that's yea, that's an affirmative particle. Though, this is a like even. This is a cow, imperfect, from the word halak, which means walk. And if you click on it, Yalak, not halak. If you click on it, it'll bring up the parsing of it. You might particularly be interested in this because you asked me about that, the other night. If you click on it, it'll bring up the parsing, and it's got Strong's there, which you can click on it and it'll go right to it. But more importantly, it's got the verb, the stem, the type, the person or the inflection of it, the gender, this is common, and so it says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley," and this is what I really like about it. It breaks up the words. Hebrew's fascinating, and they just jam everything together, kind of like German. And so when you look at that, you think that's not one word. That's actually two words. And Blue Letter Bible will enable you to break it apart, and that is ba, which is through, and this is gam, or gay, which means a valley. So yea, though I walk through the valley, this is shadow, dark shadow, and comes to mean death. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. This is low, is a negative particle. This is a cal imperfect, which there's two tenses in Hebrew, perfect and imperfect. We don't consider ourselves having a future tense. Linguists don't, but I really think we do. Present, past, and perfect, and the variations of it. Greek has got 6 tenses, but Hebrew has just got 2 tenses. It's either completed action or uncompleted action, and they use the uncompleted action, which is the imperfect, for future, if it relates to that. And sometimes they'll have adverbs in there that'll tell you it's future. But this is the verb for fear. That's what I want to show you, yara. And if you click on Strong's, it'll bring it up, and it'll show you fear, afraid, terrible, terrible thing, outline of Bible usage, and then it gives you the different stems. And that's another thing fascinating about Hebrew, is that they tell you what the word means by the stem they put it in. Not by the tense necessarily, but by the stem. And it's different from English, it's different from Greek. We all communicate in certain ways, but we communicate in different ways. So that's the word for fear. And yea, though I will not fear evil. That's the word for evil right there. So yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you. And a lot of times in the Hebrew they don't have verbs; they just jam things together. It's called juxtaposition, and you just have to supply a verb. And a lot of times you'll see that in the English if it's italics. But for you are with me, your rod and your staff, and this is another fascinating way. See that this word right here for staff is 3 different words, just all jammed together. And the Blue Letter Bible will show you what they are, and you can click on each one of them. This is and. This is the word for rod and staff. This is the word for staff, and this is the word for you. And they just jam it together, and you know it. So that is Psalm 23:4. And the other thing I like about BlueLetterBible.org is that they've got the Septuagint down at the bottom, and it is also parsed for you. Even if I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, and your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It's the same thing. But so, he fears no evil. He didn't say that I'm fixing to die and I'm fearing sin. He said, I'm fearing evil. For example, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It doesn't say I'm going to fear sin. Sin's over for him. I mean, by the time you die, and you've done about all the sin you're going to do, unless you're just panicking and, well, maybe not. Maybe I could think of a few ways you die in sin. But for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Now, vocabulary for fear, and we kind of covered that. Hebrew, yare, in Greek is phobia, and that's where we get the word phobia from. And I started to look up all the different words. I mean, there's phobias for everything. phobias for being afraid of cats, phobias for being afraid of roosters. I mean, just anything you could think of. But now we're going to play another game of Jeopardy. This is another deep theological question. How many of the Exodus generation actually entered the promised land? Now, y'all all ought to know this one, but I got a hint for you. It's the smallest prime number. And if that's not enough for you, it's the only even prime number. But Doug already got it, so it's 2. And out of that 2 million, if you take that as a good number, and it probably was less than that. I mean, Pastor Bob talked about that. I trust the Bible, but the numbers sometimes can have different interpretations, and legitimately so. But how many people left Egypt? Let's just say 2 million. How many people got in the promised land? 2. Well, that's even less than the number of people that died from taking a COVID vaccination. Had to throw that in. But and you know the story. 12 princes, they went out. They spent 40 days, I think it was 40 days, on a reconnaissance. Their face all black, sneaking through the woods and all that kind of stuff, playing army. And they came back, and what was the story? 10 of them said, "We're scared. We ain't going in. They're big down there. They're going to whip us." There was only 2 people, Joshua and Caleb, said, "The Lord promised it. Let's go." Now, these weren't sinners that went in. And now I got to thinking about that. These were all princes of, you don't go pick somebody out of the gutter and send them over there to do the reconnaissance. These were fine people that were probably well versed in the Torah, that were moral, but they were possessed with fear, and fear is closely tied to evil. I'm going to do some more thinking about it, and I want y'all to do some more thinking about it, but closely tied about evil. Now let's talk about David. This is fascinating to me. David was a sinner. Does anybody not realize what a big... do we have any Baptist people out here that think David confessed, was saved right before he died? Right after Bathsheba? David was a sinner from day one. Really. But now here's the other part. David was a man after God's own heart. And you know why? It wasn't because he was a sinner. We're all sinners. David believed God. He didn't question God. He didn't say, well, maybe there's another way of looking at this. He trusted God. David wasn't influenced by evil except on 2 occasions. And that was 1, when he killed Uriah the Hittite, and 2, when he numbered the people. But David has the most decorations of all believers of all time. And I make that... I came across this in putting all this together, and I realized that of all the believers in heaven, whose grandson's going to be sitting on the throne? Ain't going to be my grandson. It's going to be David's grandson. So regardless of what a sinner David was, and I didn't run down the line, the list of his sins, but there were many, 10 wives or 7 wives, 9 or 10 mistresses. Who counts after 3 or 4? And, dancing nude almost when they brought the ark back. With a bunch of winches. And now y'all know what winches are now, right? We got that settled. So that was the story anyway. So David was a sinner. But David confessed his sins, and David was a man after God's own heart, and he believed God, and he was absolutely fearless. David killed a lion. He killed a bear. He got there at the battle with Goliath, and nobody would go out and face Goliath. I mean, Goliath was whether he was a 8-foot, maniac or 6.5 feet or whatever, he went out and David dealt with him, but nobody else would. David was not afraid because David trusted the Lord. And the Lord blessed David in marvelous ways because there was no evil in him. He was a man after God's own heart. You can't be occupied by fear or with fear and occupied with the Lord. It just doesn't work. If David had been occupied with fear, he wouldn't have gone out there. He wouldn't have faced Goliath. And he wouldn't have become the king of Israel. Now real quick, I'm going to examine two passages to show you, or for you to think about, what the Lord wants us to believe about, fear and how He's given us these marvelous passages. And just hear this passage new. I'm just going to basically read through it. I don't want to run much over an hour and a half. I know that y'all all want to get out here in an hour, and I don't want to, I know y'all all used to an hour, and so I'm going to get you out of here. I mean, I like that about Pastor Bob. You can depend on when you're going to get out. With theme, you could be there for an hour and 40 minutes. I mean, it was terrible sometimes, but he didn't care. Anyway, Job 5:20 or 5:19. He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, in the good old King James. In 7 there shall no evil touch thee. In famine he shall redeem thee from death. You're not going to starve to death if you're a believer. And if you do, that is your way for the Lord to take you out for His glory. And that's what we need to remember. In famine he shall redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword. Thou shalt be hid from the scourge of the tongue. Now, I don't have enough of a social life going on to know what it is like to be talked about, but I can imagine it's pretty rough. And so you're protected from that. Now, sometimes you got to use your own wisdom to avoid those kind of people to protect you, but you're protected from that. And neither shall thou be afraid of destruction when it cometh, and destruction means ruin or desolation. You can look it up. You can go to Logos, or you can go to blueletterbible.org, and it's interesting to look and see what some of these words actually mean. At destruction and famine you shall laugh, neither shall you be afraid of the beast of the earth. And that's all the way from lions, and I got this beast of the earth, lions, tigers, bears. Oh my. Anybody know where that comes from? You do? Comes from Wizard of Oz. And I actually was going to put this into the video, but I hadn't got that far with my video skills. But that would have been pretty cool. I looked at it. And you shall laugh at the beasts of the earth. For thou shalt be in league with the stones of the field, and the beasts of the field shall be at peace with you. And you shall know that your tabernacle, your body shall be in peace, and you shall visit your habitation, and you shall not sin. And it goes on, you'll die. I mean, it's just the whole passage is about not fearing this life. If you can trust the Lord for salvation, you can trust Him for everything else. And this other passage that you're well familiar with, it's saying the same thing. Let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into His rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. Well, we should be afraid of not claiming His promises. And He's left us all these promises. And really, it's an insult to the Lord when we don't trust Him. That's why David was so blessed, because he did trust Him. And David's life was simple. The Lord said it, I believe it, and if I don't believe it, I'm going to go back and look at it again until I do believe it. And that's the good thing about coming and getting Bible teaching, where you actually know what it says. It's easier to believe it if you trust what it says, if you know what it says. And it goes on, for unto us as the gospel was preached as well as unto them, but the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. And we which have believed do enter into rest, as he said. Go back and read chapter 4 now that we've looked at this. And think about, what is this really telling you? It's really telling you to believe Him. Don't be afraid. And read it in the light of what we've been discussing. Because I've got several other things that I really want to get to. And so, some final thoughts on fear. This was a glitch in the matrix. This wasn't supposed to be here. I couldn't figure out how to get it out. But every person is born in sin. Likewise, every person is born with a capacity for fear. Little babies come into the world, they're afraid of two things I've read. I don't know, I haven't had a lot of experience with little babies, but I'll go with this. They're afraid of loud noises, and they're afraid of falling. Every human being is sometimes afraid, but for some, it's a way of life. They're afraid every moment of every day. Some of them are believers, some of them are unbelievers. And that's sad, because we're all going to die anyway. Why be afraid? Fear can be the result of real danger or an imagined danger. Either way, the damage to the soul is real. Now, somebody told me that fear actually stands for false evidence appearing real. Well, let me tell you something. I told you about my opening day of Fear School. Well, I went on for 25 years. I went on through Halo School. I went to Hey-Ho School. I went to about every school related to airborne you could go through, and I was scared every jump. But when you're standing there on the back end of a C-130, on this particularly happened many times actually at night, and this was a particularly dark night, and you're at 12,000 feet, and you got so much equipment on you can't even hardly stand up, and you got an oxygen mask on, and you're looking out into eternity. There isn't anything false about that. You know that this could be the last few moments of your life. And it was the best blessing of my life to experience this on a regular basis. Believe me, I stayed in fellowship. Either way, the damage to the soul is real. There's no security in this world. We think there is, and we've gone to great lengths to try to get security, Social Security, and every other kind of security, but there's no security in this world. I wish Jim was here. He told me a fantastic story about this Marine that fought all the way through, World War II and the Pacific and some of the worst battles of the war, didn't get a scratch, came home, borrowed his dad's car to go out and hook up with some of his old friends. And hook up didn't mean exactly what it meant today. It's what it meant back then. But pulled out into the street and got T-boned and died right there the first day he was back from the war. There's no security in this world. Never has been, never will be. The only security is Bible doctrine, learned, believed, and retained. And that's what we're doing right now. what we do every day is the most important thing you can do. A brave man today can be a coward tomorrow. I saw that numerous times. Saw it in my own life. Sometimes I just didn't want to jump. I did it anyway. Sometimes I had to do admin work as I got older. Right? I didn't miss that many. But a brave man can be a coward. Can't today can be a coward tomorrow. Look at Peter. Peter was, ready to take on the whole Roman army. And 6 hours later, he said, "No, I don't know that man. I mean, we all look alike. I mean, you must be mistaken. Really, I had no idea who that guy is. I just came along with the crowd, So it's something that we face every day. Final deep, really deep theological question. Was Jesus afraid? Well, it tells us that he was like us in all ways. So yes, I think he was afraid the night before in his human capacity. I mean, the verse about him sweating blood is not in the best manuscripts, but it makes a good story. But regardless, he went aside to pray. He had seen people be crucified. That was going on in that culture. I mean, he knew what was coming up. He prayed to the Lord, if it be your will, take this cup from me. He was afraid. But Jesus was fully man and fully God. He experienced fear the night before the crucifixion. I believe that. However, fear is not a sin unless you act on it or you don't act on it. The brave man is afraid and he acts anyway, or avoids acting depending on the situation. There's nobody, and I've never been in combat. I got activated for 2 wars. I never heard a shot fired in anger. But I was laying there scared to death the night we flew out on that big old airplane going overseas. I didn't know I was coming back. None of us did. And Bob's been in combat. I mean, it's you're going to be afraid. And that's okay. The Lord gives you the ability to act or not act. And that is what you need to concentrate on. The Lord tests us by allowing us to experience fears and providing us either earthly salvation or comfort or both. Often the Lord will give us multiple chances to pass the same test. I could tell you some things that have happened to me that are absolutely amazing, where I've been tested in the same way once or twice or 3 times or 4 times and finally got it right. Kind of like Job, maybe. I don't know, it wasn't that bad, But the Lord does interact with you. Fear is one of Satan's main systems for controlling this world. Look at what's happened to our country. They have taken us and changed us into a nation of sissies. I mean, and I'm talking about COVID, and it is a dangerous thing. It is something to consider. It is something to be aware of. But it's being used, and it was used to put in a president that we may well regret. So fear is one of Satan's main systems for controlling this world. If you're afraid, you'll do anything for security. Better red than dead. You're not filled with the Holy Spirit if fear is dominating your thinking and your life. Your hors combat in the angelic conflict. I had to throw that in to show you how educated I am. But that is a French term that's used in the military. That means you're out of action, buddy. So you're out of action in the angelic conflict if you're dominated by fear. Sin has an easy solution. I don't overthink it. It's 1 John 1:9, confess it, forget it, and move on. Evil's much harder, only handled by spiritual growth. Death frees the believer from sin, but also from fear and evil. One day, this is the only time we have a chance to experience fear, because there'll be no fear and nothing to fear in the resurrection bodies. Can't be hurt, can't be hungry, Now, I mean, you're going to know all your questions are going to be answered, so there'll be nothing to fear. Now is the only time. The Lord will give you something to fear. I got things in my life right now that I'm working on, but I am working on them. And if you're afraid of something, whether it's the Lord will show you, and you can, ask Him, believe. There's 7,000 promises in the Bible, over 7,000. How many of them deal with fear? If you bow your heads, thank you, Father, for this time. Help us to be courageous, to trust you, to know that you go before us, that you're with us, and that you'll always have our back. That if we are in sin or in evil, that you may discipline us and you'll bring us back. But thank you for your word. Thank you for a chance to share this. In Christ's name, His glory. Amen. That's it. All she wrote. Let's answer what?